USAA knows dynamic duos can save the day, like superheroes and sidekicks or auto and home insurance. With USAA, you can bundle your auto and home and save up to 10%. Learn more and get a quote at usaa.com/bundle. Restrictions apply.
Hi there, and welcome to Raising Me. I'm Adrienne Stein. Here we talk about some of the things that we experience as parents and take them right to the experts for advice. I have to say a very special thank you as well to our sponsor, Sweetser, for supporting Raising Me and all the work that we do here. So I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but don't look now because school is right around the corner. Yeah, I know. Where did summer go? Today we are talking about something I've really always been quite fascinated with, though always thought, no way, not for me, couldn't do it, nope, no way, nope. That is homeschooling. But I gotta tell you, after I learned more about it from our expert today, I do now definitely see the appeal. And while it's not for everyone, no question there, it is something to think about, even if it's just to understand why some families choose it. So we're talking about the how, the why, and the where would I even begin with Brooke Thompson. She's the owner of Haven Homeschool and has homeschooled her 6 children, by the way. She is such a great resource and a neat lady, but for parents and families who homeschool, she is wonderful. Or maybe if you're just considering it as a path for you, great resource as well there. So again, if you're curious or seriously considering it, or you just want to know what it's like behind the scenes, this conversation has something for you. Brooke, thank you so much for joining us. This is such an intriguing topic, whether you are homeschooling, you've considered it, or maybe you've never really considered it, but just are intrigued by the idea. I'm one of those people, just full disclosure, I always think, well, I could never do that. But you're saying, wait just a minute until we have this conversation before you say, you can never do that. So let's just talk about you. Tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into homeschooling.
Sure. So I went to a college north of Boston and majored in communications and theater. I didn't meet my husband until after college, just a few months after school. And he had gone to Johnson & Wales in Providence. So kind of going home, because I'm from closer to that area, we met. And the only time I'd ever heard of homeschooling come up was because 2 of my best friends in college had been homeschooled. But it was a blip. You were in college. You weren't exploring the backstory.
No, and you weren't, it's like, oh, okay. And then you just kind of move on with your own thing.
So I never really gave that any thought until my husband and I were starting to have children. And it got to, year 5 of our first son's life. And we were having to make decisions now about schooling. And I actually ended up calling up those girlfriends and saying, what the heck is homeschooling? Because I really had no idea what it was. I was private public schooled. My husband was public schooled. We had no idea.
But what even sparked that as an option? Because I just transparently, when my first was 5 or going into kindergarten, like that didn't register as a possibility of homeschooling. So something must have really interested you about this topic or idea.
Yeah, I think my husband and I have always been really curious learners. We love reading. We love traveling. And so the idea of homeschooling, I had a couple friends. I had fallen into a friend group in Maine that some of them were doing that. And so I started to ask them questions, but it was kind of product of the environment. I was exposed to some families that were doing it and kind of decided to dive deeper into that and explore what that actually even was.
So you called these college girlfriends who had mentioned just a blip in passing
that's how they grew up.
Yeah. So what did they tell you?
Well, one of the things that they shared was just how family-centric it is. And that's something that was really important to Patrick and I. We knew that we wanted more kids. And we really wanted to do life with them, live life with them. That was really important to us. So I think the biggest thing for us was we were so attracted to the idea that we got all our kids' light bulb moments if we homeschooled. We would always be able to be with them and navigate hard things with them. friendships, and that was really attractive to us. That was our number one reason. There are other ones too. We liked the idea of a individualized, strength-based education, and I think it's hard to do that in a private school or a public school or a charter school or things like that. But when you're only schooling, one or two or three or four or five, six kids, you can really give them more time, and you get to see, oh, my child is really good at this. Let's hone in on that and really encourage them in this way. Or, oh, this is an area that they really need to work on. Let's find something tactile, to get their juices flowing with that particular subject.
We should mention you have 6 kids.
I do.
Homeschooling all of them,
Yeah.
which is an impressive feat in and of itself.
Yeah, thank you.
So once you had talked to your friends, in your community, but then also these couple of friends that you had in college.
Yeah.
What did the beginning of it look like for you? Like, how did you go from, and this is a great idea, to actually doing it?
Yeah, I did do a lot of research. There's a wonderful author, John Holt. He writes a lot of really wonderful books about homeschooling and education. So just kind of doing some research, there's a plethora of things online as well that you can read about homeschooling, and kind of honing in on what my strengths were as a potential teacher. That really helped. And my child being so young in the beginning, we just had him and then a baby at that time. It was easy to say, okay, well, most of this is just going to be play in the beginning, And at that point, you didn't even need to report to the state, because at that time it was 7. Now it's age 6 that you have to actually start to send in your notice of intent and do that. So we had 2 years that we could kind of learn him, what does he love to do? How does he like to learn? And he's definitely a hands-on learner. So we started to formulate, all right, well, what does he need to learn math and English and all of these things? And also just getting to know what was required. And
what does it, in your house, and obviously you have, with 6 kids, you have a wide age range.
We do.
But what does a typical day at your house look like? And maybe there's no typical day, but just sort of an idea of what this would look like.
Yeah, our life has changed a lot with the addition of all of these children. Sure. And I know it's funny to say 6 kids because I feel like we're that homeschooling cliche that people think of. Yeah. I always wanted a big family way before we had decided to homeschool. And my husband, when we were younger, he didn't want any kids. And so he always says we negotiate and we had 6.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, so, but
would you have 12?
No, kitchen's closed.
Got it.
We're all done. Yeah. But it's been a really wonderful ride. It's been interesting. It's always changed as we've added more children. One thing that I really like is the older ones start to teach the younger ones. There's a lot of mentoring that takes place. Whether you have one child and maybe you're in a homeschool co-op, you'll see that as well. But in our family, that's happened a lot. So right now, one of my oldest son loves to sit down with his only and youngest brother, who is 6, and they practice reading together a lot. So right now, our son, who is 20, he's already graduated. We graduated him 3 years ago. He is finishing up his degree at UMA in business. And he also works full-time in a pipe fitting apprenticeship program at Bath Iron Works. So he had done early college before he graduated and had finished about 48 credits while he was still in high school. So he was able to work full-time and not be too stressed out and still, pursuing his degree. So he lives with us while he's finishing his degree right now. And I know this won't be very much longer, but we still have all 6 kids living at the house. Wow. So he's off a lot. Obviously, he's very busy. So he's off. And when he comes home from work, he's usually doing college work. He's starting a business as well. So he's working online, pursuing that business. And then our other daughters we have 4 girls in the middle. They are really big into dancing, competitive dancing. So we're doing a lot of dance classes. Several of my kids love to play soccer as well. So we go to soccer. We do co-op twice a week. It's when you're homeschooling, it's almost hard to carve out time to be home. As people get more into it, I've heard that a lot from families. There's just so much out there, so many classes you can take, so many sports or different activities that you could do outside the home, groups you can join, field trips to join. And you really have to be good about setting boundaries for your family and saying, Thursday or Tuesday or whatever, that's our home day where we're going to really plug into our academics and get some of that done. So that's what we do. A lot of my kids also have jobs. They've loved to work. They're very money driven. And so it's been really fun to see them, excel in those ways. And our 17-year-old is just a phenomenal baker. And she works at a local cafe and bakes for them 3 days a week, 4 days a week now because it's summer in Brunswick. And our other daughter got a job at Market Basket and just loves, seeing all the people she knows. And
one thing too, and you mentioned the academic part of it, I think that just inherently people are like, well, I'm not qualified to do that. I don't have a degree in education. And, I'm thinking in terms of like my daughter in high school, some of the math she's doing, I wouldn't even know where to start. So, how did you overcome some of those? I don't know if it's fear, concern, but I think that would be very natural for anybody who's thinking about or starting homeschooling is like, how am I really qualified to do this?
It's a great question. It's one that we get a lot. And I think in the beginning it's easy because children are young. You're playing a lot.
Course.
They're learning through play. But as they get older, I can understand why people start to feel like, man, maybe I'll homeschool or I'll dabble, when they're younger. But then those older grades, high school, that can feel really intimidating. We're really lucky in Maine that we have such a wonderful early college program through UMA and also the community college system. And you can take a number of credits while you're still in high school for free, which is just amazing. So if anyone is thinking about transitioning, hasn't been homeschooling, but is thinking about transitioning in high school to homeschooling, I highly recommend contacting the early college program at both of those institutions. So we've leaned heavily into early college, like with some classes.
Relying on other experts, essentially, like when it comes to
the professors at the University of Maine system, SMCC, they're wonderful.
Right.
And so my son did a chemistry lab through UMA. That obviously counted as his chemistry with high school, but he also got college credits. So there are certain things that I don't enjoy teaching. They do not bring me joy.
Right. Fair enough.
Yeah.
But you're connecting him with the resources. So
Absolutely.
Almost you're like the train conductor in that way, finding the right. So maybe you're not physically teaching the AP chemistry class or whatever it might be, but you're connecting your son with the resources that are out there. It takes the digging to do that. What do you find are some of the biggest misconceptions when it comes to homeschooling kids?
On WhatsApp, no one can see or hear your personal messages. Whether it's a voice call, message, or sending a password. To WhatsApp, it's all just this. So whether you're sharing the streaming password in the family chat or trading those late-night voice messages that could basically become a podcast, your personal messages stay between you, your friends, and your family. No one else. Not even us. WhatsApp. Message privately with everyone.
Well, to piggyback on the resources, I think that people don't realize how many resources are out there, not just for the older years and leaning into maybe getting some college credits and, enrolling at SMCC or, anything in your area. The resources are there. There's tutoring options that are available. Even 10 years ago when we first started, there were not resource centers available to homeschoolers. And now they're cropping up in all these different areas. People who used to be school administration or were teachers and just feel really called to start their own businesses. One just started in Richmond, Maine. It's been really incredible to see people tapping into the homeschooling because homeschooling is growing so much in Maine.
Yeah, and I think that's like, how have you seen this evolve over the years? Obviously you've been homeschooling for a long time now. Your oldest is, 20 or in his 20s. Yeah. So like you have seen the evolution of this pre and post pandemic too, where it really grew in popularity and didn't really ever go back to pre-pandemic levels.
Correct.
So how have you seen it evolve over the years?
It's been really interesting. When we first started homeschooling, there were a lot of homeschoolers. We definitely had a community. I had started a really wonderful homeschool co-op that was closer to Portland at the time. And so my kids were seeing people every week, but there weren't the heavy homeschool sports that are available now. And regionally, there are several nonprofits in Maine now that focus on homeschool sports and sports teams. That didn't exist. Maybe the arts programs that are around now, those didn't exist. So I would say the biggest growth has been in the extracurricular, the enrichment options that are now available. There are a lot of businesses, dance studios, karate studios that now offer homeschool classes during the day. That wasn't a thing when my kids were younger. So a lot of families can tap into, those after school hours, but there's also a lot available during the day that you can include in your homeschooling day if you wanted to.
Okay. And so how do you balance the idea because part of a big advantage of homeschooling is that flexibility, right? Like you can kind of create your own schedule. To a certain extent, you can create your own schedule. But how do you balance that structure versus flexibility? Because I would imagine you still have to have structure to make sure that you're hitting those benchmarks.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, so the Maine law states that every year you have to either test at the end of the year or have an assessment done by a Maine certified teacher. And we are fortunate that in the homeschooling community, we have a lot of homeschoolers that have maintained their teaching certificate. So they really understand homeschooling. And can help families with that. But it is hard to find a balance. I think that is the biggest struggle with homeschooling, especially families that are new to it in year 2 or 3. They start to find their groove. So one piece of advice I would give is just to be gentle with yourself, because a lot of people put so much pressure on themselves that they're going to have to get it perfect immediately. And there's so much to learn. And there's a little bit of deschooling that has to happen with your own brain if you're not
What do you mean
used
by
to.
that?
Well, I think people are. So I'm a product of the public school environment.
Sure.
And I loved my time in school. I was an honors student. I was involved in everything, as a theater girl and music. And so it was a very positive experience for me. But people that come from public schooling environment have this idea that kids need to, be in a classroom. They need to learn this way. It's going to take a lot of time. When in reality, your child could bang out nearly all their academics, if they're 10, in 2 or 3 hours, and then have the rest of the day to play or to cook or to focus on one of their hobbies. Because you are right there with them, it's just quicker. The process of learning is quicker. The process of getting their academics done for the day is quicker. So I find that families that might be intimidated, it's a relief to realize that you're actually getting a full week done in a matter of, just a few days, and you can carve out time to get that done and kind of check that off for the week. But then also you've got all this time that your kids can go play outside or can garden or, like I said, do their hobbies as well.
What comes to mind too is I wonder about like parents working at the same time they do this. Like on one hand, it seems like, well, the kids are at school, you're not running around everywhere. So maybe you could work, and there's a lot of work from home now. And so,
yes.
However, it also feels like you need to be plugged in a lot in managing the schedule and making sure they're learning and all of that. So can you effectively work from home while also teaching homeschooling your children? Is that realistic, just time commitment wise? Or do you find this as a full-time job? I mean, with 6 kids, I would say yes, for crying out loud. But, is there a way to balance that?
There is. I think you have to do a personal assessment before you jump into homeschooling and see and have a really honest conversation with yourself. Like, am I a disciplined person? Am I disciplined enough to do this? Or is this a skill that I could learn? Because certainly we grow, right? So there are things that we can do better. I've definitely gotten more disciplined as I've gotten older because of homeschooling and also because of the other things that I do. My husband, we made the choice when we were having kids that I would be a stay-at-home mom. And so he's always worked full-time. But over the course of 20 years, things have changed. He still works full-time, but I am actually a clinical herbalist. I have my own small business. I have a skincare line, an herbal formula line. And so because of the modern herbalist, I'm growing everything. So the kids work with me in the gardens a lot, especially in the summertime. And that's really fun. But that's like another piece to juggle while we're still homeschooling all the kids.
Yeah.
And then I'm also involved in the co-ops that we do. Haven is a co-op community that I started. We have 3 locations in the state of Maine, and we also have a drop-off 1-day-a-week teen program. And then I'm also the vice president and co-founder of Maine Home Education Alliance. So I know on paper you're like, oh, how do you do that? But I think you just have to be really good about carving out your time, not being wasteful with it. And the good news is, we do like to work with textbooks and curriculum and books more, but there are so many online options. I have a lot of friends that are either single parents, they're working, but they're still finding time to homeschool their kids. I have friends that they're both full-time and they find time to homeschool their kids. There's programs that some of my friends utilize where it's a drop-off enrichment-based program. Their kids might do that 2 days a week, and that's when they're doing the bulk of their work, particularly if they work from home. I have other friends that are nurses, and so they make sure that they're home with the kids, homeschooling them during the week, but on the weekends, while their husband's home from his job, they are doing doubles. And I mean, it's a grinding schedule, but that was the commitment that they wanted to make to their family. And so there's a lot of different variations of how people homeschool now. And that's one of the biggest things coming out of that COVID era that's been most interesting. Because as you said, we were homeschoolers before.
Right.
So I've been able to see that evolution, just kind of sitting here eating popcorn, watching it all happen. But it's been really fascinating to see families figure out a way to succeed homeschooling and get really creative with how they're still doing the hustle, making money, bringing it home, supporting their family. It's really incredible.
Yeah.
People are incredible. I mean, if they have a goal in mind, and they say, this is what we want for our family, this is a sacrifice we want to make. And certainly it's a privilege too, but it is a major sacrifice. We bear the burden financially of homeschooling. We are not a state that offers a credit to homeschoolers or anything like that. Most homeschoolers aren't interested in that. So financially, you fully fund homeschooling. So if you have to buy curriculum, obviously any activities you do, some families have the option of going in to the school for certain subjects. Or if you have a homeschool friendly district, your child might be able to do sports or do band or chorus or things like that. But most homeschooling families I know, they're funding those music lessons themselves and
visits to the museum,
exactly.
all of that. Yeah, so that is something to keep in mind.
Absolutely.
When it does come to the curriculum, like how do you choose curriculum, or do you come up with it yourself? And again, that kind of lends itself to like, well, I don't know how to pick curriculum.
Yeah.
But like, are there places where it's like, oh, 4th grade curriculum right here that would keep that you just kind of lift and follow that schedule with your child throughout what would be the school year?
If someone was homeschooling curious and didn't know where to start, joining some of the larger Facebook groups in Maine would be advised. You will receive really good information and advice. You can say, this is kind of where my brain is. I'm strong in these subjects. I'm a little nervous to teach these. We're a Christian family. We're a secular family. And families will respond and say, this is the curriculum we use. This is what we found works really well. This is what we found doesn't work really well. If you're nervous about using paper curriculum and you like the idea of your children using online resources instead, you can either parcel that out by subject, or there's online curriculum companies where you buy a membership and it's just fully remote.
Yeah.
And your child is doing every subject through that. So there is a lot there. But I find that joining groups, getting advice, it makes it less scary. It helps you to kind of dial in, okay, what do we even want to do? Do we want to use the computer a lot or a little bit? Do our kids respond better to having to write in actual books? Do we want to take homeschooling from a literature perspective and spend most of our days at the library just reading? Every family does it differently, and it works.
Well, what I'm hearing too is there's a real community around it as well, and people are available to sort of help you navigate if you seek that out. Who have you found homeschooling is best suited for? What kind of family?
I think a family that I mentioned before that Patrick and I are curious learners. I think families that are curious learners, that are eclectic learners, whose kids like hands-on learning. It seems to me that a lot of families that choose homeschooling, it's because they recognize their kids might have trouble just sitting still, and they need to be out, building things and in the garden with dirt under their fingernails. People who maybe have gifted children and they're not sure if being in a school setting might be the best for them, and they feel equipped to be able to handle that giftedness and really
move forward
feed it
a little faster.
Yeah. And then also kids that are neurodivergent. Maybe you have a child that has autism or is neurospicy in some way. Parents know their children best, and so there are a lot of families who their kids need a little extra love, a little extra support, and they feel like they can do that best. The good news is we have a lot of really wonderful, supportive portfolio reviewers, the certified teachers that do those assessments. And they're not just available at the end of the year, they're available throughout the year. So if you are a parent who is like, man, I just need a little extra support, I have some questions about this particular learning style, or navigating this subject with my child, or we've hit a roadblock, you can call up and schedule an appointment with any of the dozens and dozens of certified teachers we have throughout the state. And they're happy to sit down with you either in person or over like an online meeting platform and figure out how to help you. So there is a lot of support available.
I think one of the things that might give folks pause about it is the socialization, like wondering, well, will my child have enough socialization if they're home all the time or most of the days? And obviously, you have museum visits and things like that. But how were you able to address the socialization portion of the concerns that parents might have when they think about homeschooling?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think no two people are the same. So there are some people, whether they're in private school or public school or homeschooling, that are naturally just more introverted and shy. And I think we need to be honest and honor that. Not everybody is a social butterfly that wants to go around, knowing everybody in the community or your town. Not everybody is a mayor.
Right.
So I think it's okay to embrace the type of family you are. But the good news is there's so much community in Maine. As I mentioned earlier, you really have to be have healthy boundaries around saying, this is the day we're going to be home. We have to, no one can work. No one can go hang out with their friends. Because my kids, they're in competitive dance. They sing, they do theater. They're involved in so much. They love sports and they do sports throughout the week as well. We participate in a whole family co-op on Tuesdays. It's from 10 to 3. And all the parents teach many different classes, which is great for me because I'm more of a history, English, theater, communications girl. I really don't enjoy math. I feel bad saying that, but it's the truth.
No, it's totally fine.
But there's other parents that majored in science or math, and they love to teach. That's their jam.
Yeah.
And so in a co-op setting, you have all of these different subjects that are being taught. My children have been exposed to things that I would never even think to teach. But it's another person's, where they get their jollies. And so it's so amazing just to have that kind of environment.
Are they with other kids during those
Correct.
times? Okay, so they're, right. And the socialization, it's like, I think it's almost, maybe it's antiquated to think, well, the kids are home by themselves. It sounds like between the sports and the co-op type of situation, homeschooling really has a lot of different types of socializing opportunities.
Yep. Most of the families that I know, all their kids play some sort of sport, do some sort of fine arts program, and do some sort of co-op or drop-off program, or group setting like a regular field trip group. So And in the summertime, we're always going to the beach with our friends, or hiking. Obviously, we live in a really beautiful state. So we have to take advantage of that as well.
If anybody's, listening to this and they have been thinking about it, because I think there's just an interest, like there's a curiosity around it. Even like for me, I'm more of like, oh, I could never do that. But I'm so curious. How can people pull that off? Because, when you think about some of the advantages, you're like, well, that would be nice. But if somebody is thinking about doing this for the upcoming school year, what would be a great first step?
If I was starting to homeschool right now, I would join some of those Facebook groups. It's just the best place to get the most, kind of quantity and quality advice. I probably would schedule with a reviewer that I found I vibed with, just so I could kind of start off strong and ask all my questions. People are always welcome to contact the Maine Home Education Alliance. We have a website that answers a lot of FAQs, and you would be directed to the whole board. So you can email any of us. All of our contact information is right there, and we're happy to sit down with people, walk them through, and hold their hand as much as they need.
So what is something that you know now that you wish you knew back when you first started?
I think it's easy to be really hard on yourself. And be nervous. Obviously, you kind of it feels like you have your child's future in the palm of your hands. And so giving yourself grace, allowing yourself to ease into it and explore, put everything in front of your child and see what sticks.
We have a lot of resources too that you have sent in that we'll make sure that we put on our website as well. As, one final takeaway from you to anybody listening to this podcast, what would that be?
Well, I'll tell a quick story because that had to do with the question that you just asked. So my husband and I were early readers and voracious readers just from the very beginning. And so we had this idea that obviously all of our kids are going to be that way too. And we know that kids are all different.
That's not how it works.
That's not how it works.
No.
So our first child kind of came along and read at 6 or 7, which is what, that's the normal kind of reading age when they start to dive into books. Our second daughter came along and she showed no interest. In fact, she was kind of adamant, like, I don't want to, So I just decided we're not going to push this. And when she was 10, we finally said, honey, we've got to do this.
Yeah.
We got to move on here. And she had been learning other subjects and focusing on other things, but we really wanted to see that happen. So she learned to read from, Sally went to the store, to reading Plato and Socrates in 1 year.
Oh my gosh.
And so I think that was such a huge lesson for me, that sometimes you really just need to relax and let the child lead. And, 2 years after she had learned to read, she would run up to the library and come back, and I'd say, oh, what books did you grab? And she goes, well, I got this. It's an anthology on African-American literature and poetry. I got Socrates, I got it. Just, she is my most sophisticated reader, voracious reader, reads better and more than most adults I know. And I'm so grateful that I followed my intuition with her and let her lead. I think if we had pushed her, she might have not enjoyed reading. And now she's on a path to, want to double major in college. We've been looking at colleges with her. She's going to pursue dance in college as well. And it's just wonderful to see sometimes when you relax, when you give yourself a little grace, you see that end result. And I'm so grateful that I had other friends in my life that said, just relax, just wait.
Yeah.
Let her breathe, let her come to it on her own. And she really did.
Give yourself grace. I actually got the chills you telling that story. That's awesome. Brooke, thank you so much.
You're
really
welcome.
Appreciate it. I do want to just reiterate, we will have resources on our website, which is wgme.com/raisingme. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Adrienne. I appreciate it too.
Yes. Give yourself grace. It is such a common takeaway here on the podcast, but it is so true, particularly for anyone who is or is thinking about homeschooling. And a couple of things that really stuck with me. First, As I admitted to Brooke, homeschooling simply never appealed to me. Just no way. Couldn't do it. Wouldn't want to even think about it. However, after this conversation with Brooke, I was like, yeah, I get it. And I do think I could do it. We're not, by the way, right now, but I do see how it can be done and what can be some really major advantages around it. I guess, without even really realizing it, I had a pretty antiquated idea of what homeschooling was like. From all the activities and the opportunities to pursue passions and the co-op groups and the early college courses. Yeah, I totally get it. Thank you so much for listening to Raising Me and to our sponsor, Sweetser. I'm Adrienne Stein. This episode is edited by Megan Littlefield with production help from Carissa Paulson. Please follow Raising Me wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, give us a like and a share if you enjoyed this episode as well. Wherever you are, I hope you learned something new and get to take a little time for you.
Mom and Dad, I'm growing at an alarming rate, and clothes you buy me this year will be very small very soon. But at least your wallet doesn't have to be my fashion victim with low prices for school at Amazon. Hope that helps. Amazon. Spend less, smile more.